The night shift wasn't supposed to matter. That was the official narrative the story management liked to tell themselves during their catered lunches and quarterly town halls. Nights were quiet, they said. Nights were for maintenance, for passive monitoring, for systems that practically ran themselves. Nights were a cost center, a leftover relic from an older, less efficient time, and me. I was just the guy who sat in a dimly lit operations room making sure nothing exploded while everyone else slept peacefully in their king-sized beds. What they never understood, what they never even tried to understand, was that the night wasn't quiet. It only looked that way because I was there. My name's Marcus Hale, Senior Reconciliation Analyst, though titles never meant much in this place. Titles were for LinkedIn profiles and email signatures. What I actually did was keep 6 regional systems, each built by different teams over the last 15 years, from tearing each other apart between midnight and sunrise. East Coast inventory talked one language. West Coast billing spoke another. Midwest logistics, that was a dialect no one alive fully understood anymore, and every night, like clockwork, they all started arguing. At exactly 12:07 a.m., the first cracks would show. A mismatch in inventory counts between Chicago and Denver. Not huge, maybe 47 units of some industrial adhesive that nobody outside procurement had ever heard of, but enough to trigger a cascade of validation errors. By 12:30, the billing system in Atlanta would start flagging discrepancies. By 1 o'clock a.m., the European export logs, don't even ask why those were tied into our system, would start rejecting entries because the timestamps didn't line up. That's when the real work began. I didn't fix things the way the manuals said. The manuals were written by people who had never stayed past 6 o'clock p.m. I fixed things the way you fix a car that's been held together by duct tape and bad decisions for a decade. You learn its quirks, its moods, the sounds it makes right before something goes wrong. A certain lag in the Chicago server, that meant the overnight sync job was about to choke. A slight delay in Dallas, that meant the API handshake with the vendor system was about to fail. I didn't need alerts, I could feel it. So I'd step in, manually reroute a data stream here, adjust a timestamp offset there, override a validation rule just long enough to let the system breathe, then patch it back before anyone noticed. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't scalable, but it worked. It always worked. For 8 years, nothing catastrophic ever happened on the night shift. No major outages, no financial discrepancies that couldn't be quietly corrected before morning. By the time the day crew came in, the dashboards were green, the reports were clean, and everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to. So they assumed the system was stable. That was their first mistake. The operations room sat in the far corner of the building, past the rows of empty cubicles and silent conference rooms. At night, the place felt like a ghost town. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that sickly pale glow that made time feel like it had stopped. My desk was a fortress of monitors, 4 screens, each dedicated to a different region. Logs scrolled endlessly, lines of green and white text that most people would glance at and immediately ignore. To me, it was a conversation, a constant stream of signals telling me what was about to go wrong. I had my routines. Coffee at 11:45 p.m., black and bitter. First system check at midnight. By 2 o'clock a.m., I'd be deep in the weeds, chasing down inconsistencies that hadn't even triggered alerts yet. Around 4:30, things would calm down, just enough for me to lean back in my chair, close my eyes for a minute, and listen to the hum of the servers. That hum, it wasn't just noise, it was reassurance. As long as it stayed steady, I knew I was winning. The only other person who ever saw that side of things was Lewis, the overnight security guard. He'd do his rounds every couple of hours, always stopping by my desk with a paper cup of vending machine coffee. "Still fighting the machines?" he'd ask, leaning against the doorframe. "Machines aren't the problem," I'd say, not looking up from my screens. "It's the people who think they understand them." Lewis would laugh, shake his head, and move on. He didn't need to understand the details. He could see it in my face, in the way I barely blinked for hours at a time, in the tension that never quite left my shoulders. He knew this wasn't a job you could replace with a checklist. The first sign of trouble didn't come from the systems. It came from an email. Monday morning, 9:12 a.m., I was just finishing my shift, wrapping up the last of the reconciliation reports, when the notification popped up. Subject line: Operational Efficiency Initiative, Phase 1. That was never a good sign. I opened it, already feeling that familiar knot forming in my stomach. Corporate language, polished and vague, talking about streamlining processes and reducing redundancies. The kind of message that sounds positive until you realize it's just a fancy way of saying someone's about to lose their job. Then I saw my department mentioned. Evaluation of overnight operations and resource allocation. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. There it was, they were looking at the night shift. I glanced around the empty room at the monitors still glowing softly in the early morning light. Everything was calm now. Everything looked perfect. Of course it did. I'd spent the last 8 hours making sure of it, and that was the problem. If nothing ever goes wrong, people start to think nothing ever could. The meeting was scheduled for Wednesday afternoon. I should have been asleep. Instead, I was sitting in a glass-walled conference room, surrounded by people who had never seen the system outside of a PowerPoint presentation. At the head of the table was Daniel Cross, VP of Operations. Mid-40s, expensive suit, the kind of guy who spoke in metrics and buzzwords like they were a second language. Next to him was a younger guy, early 20s, fresh haircut, laptop covered in stickers, probably an analyst or a consultant. They all looked the same these days. Marcus, Daniel said, flashing that practiced corporate smile. Thanks for joining us. Didn't feel like I had much of a choice. Let's get straight to it, he continued. We've been reviewing operational costs, and one area that stands out is overnight staffing. From what we can see, system activity during those hours is minimal. Minimal. I almost laughed. Instead, I folded my arms and waited. The kid next to him turned his laptop around, showing a dashboard full of clean, colorful charts. See here, he said, pointing at a graph. Error rates overnight are near zero. System uptime is consistently above 99.9%. It's actually our most stable period. Of course it was, because I was there. So, Daniel leaned forward, fingers steepled. We're exploring the possibility of automating overnight processes, reducing manual intervention, letting the system run as designed. I looked at the screen, then back at him. And when it doesn't, I asked, a slight pause. It's designed not to fail, the kid said quickly. That's when I knew. They had no idea what they were dealing with. I walked out of that meeting with a strange feeling settling in my chest, not anger. Not yet, something colder. They thought the night shift was unnecessary because they had never seen it without me. And soon they were going to. They didn't fire me right away. That's not how companies like this operate. They don't pull the trigger in the open. They build a paper trail, soften the ground, convince themselves it's a logical decision instead of a reckless one. It makes them feel smarter when things go wrong later. Wednesday's meeting was just the opening move. Thursday I got a calendar invite. Friday another. By Monday it had a name, Overnight Transition Plan. I came in that night like I always did, 11:40 p.m., 10 minutes early, badge swipe, same flicker of fluorescent lights in the hallway. The building was quiet, but it felt different, like the air had shifted just enough to let you know something was off. Lewis was at the front desk. Hey, he said, watching me a little closer than usual. Heard they're making changes. Yeah, I replied, not slowing down. They always do. He didn't laugh this time. The operations room greeted me with the same low hum of servers, but I could already tell something was wrong. Not with the system, no, the system was fine. It was the setup. One of my monitors had been unplugged. I stood there for a second, staring at the blank screen like it had personally insulted me. I plugged it back in, watched it flicker to life, and felt that cold thing in my chest tighten just a little more. They'd been in here. That didn't happen. This room was mine. Not officially, not on paper, but in practice. Nobody touched anything in here without asking me first. Not because of policy, because they knew better, or at least they used to. By midnight, the system started its usual routine. 12:07 a.m. Chicago inventory drift, 12:19 a.m. Dallas latency spike, 12:31 a.m. Atlanta billing mismatch, same pattern, same quiet chaos. I rolled my shoulders, cracked my knuckles, and got to work. But tonight I didn't move as fast, not because I couldn't, because I was thinking. Every fix I made, every workaround I applied, I found myself pausing for half a second longer than usual, not enough to break anything. Just enough to notice how fragile it all really was, because for the first time in 8 years, I knew I might not be here tomorrow night, and the system wouldn't know what to do without me. The official conversation came Tuesday afternoon. Same glass-walled conference room, same polished smiles. Daniel didn't waste time. Marcus, we've completed our evaluation, he said, sliding a folder across the table. As part of our efficiency initiative, we're restructuring overnight operations. Restructuring, there it was. We'll be transitioning to an automated monitoring system, he continued. With remote support available if needed. If needed, I repeated. Yes, based on our data, incidents during overnight hours are extremely rare. I looked at him for a long moment, then at the kid again, the one with the dashboards. He was watching me like this was a case study, like I was a variable in his model. You're not seeing incidents, I said slowly, because I resolve them before they become incidents. Daniel smiled, that same calm, rehearsed expression. And we appreciate your contributions, he said, truly, but the system has matured. It's time to let it operate independently. Independently, like it was some kind of self-sustaining organism instead of a patched-together mess of contradictions. When does this transition happen? I asked. End of this week. Of course it did. Friday, I said. Yes, payroll reconciliation night. Of course it was Friday, I didn't argue. That's the part they never expect. No raised voice. No desperate defense, no emotional plea about how important I was. I just nodded, closed the folder without even looking at the contents, and stood up. Okay, I said. Daniel blinked just slightly. He'd expected pushback. Maybe even a scene. You'll assist with knowledge transfer over the next few days, he added quickly. I paused at the door. I've been assisting for 8 years, I said. You just didn't notice. Then I walked out. The next 3 nights were different. They had me documenting things, processes, procedures, key workflows. I sat there at my desk, typing into their sterile little templates, describing systems that had never once behaved the way the documentation claimed they should. Step 1, run reconciliation script. Step 2, validate outputs. Step 3, confirm alignment across regions. Clean, simple, completely useless, because the real work wasn't in the steps, it was in the judgment. In knowing that when step 2 failed, and it always failed, you didn't escalate, you didn't restart, you didn't follow protocol, you adjusted, quietly, precisely, based on experience no document could capture. I didn't write that part down, not because I was trying to sabotage them, because you can't write instinct into a manual. Friday came faster than it should have. Last shift, the building felt heavier that night. Like it knew something was about to change. Louis met me at the entrance again. This it? He asked. Yeah, I said. He nodded slowly. Bad idea. Not my idea, I replied. We both knew how this was going to end. I took my seat in the operations room one last time. 4 monitors, all green, all quiet. 12:07 a.m. Chicago drift. I fixed it. 12:19 a.m. Dallas spike. Handled. 12:31 a.m. Atlanta mismatch. Resolved. Everything moved like clockwork, like it always did. Except tonight, I paid attention to every single fix, every tiny adjustment, every invisible correction that kept the system from spiraling. Because tonight I wasn't just working, I was watching, memorizing, not for me, for what was about to happen next. At 5:30 a.m. the system settled into its usual calm. No errors, no alerts. No signs of the war that had just been fought behind the scenes. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the steady hum of the servers. Perfect, of course it was. I stood up slowly, stretched, and looked around the room. 8 years. Thousands of nights, millions of problems solved before anyone even knew they existed. And now, non-essential, I shut down my terminal. The screens went dark one by one. The hum of the servers didn't change. It never did. That was the illusion. I left my badge on the desk, not at the front, not with HR, here where the real work happened. Walking out of the building felt strange, not dramatic, not emotional, just quiet. Like stepping out of a machine that was still running. Louis was waiting at the door. That it? He asked again. Yeah, I said. He hesitated. Then, what happens now? I looked back over my shoulder toward the dark hallway leading to the operations room. For a second I almost said nothing, but then I shrugged. They find out what I actually did, I said. Saturday night would be the first night without me, and for the first time in 8 years, no one would be there to catch the fall. Saturday night didn't start with chaos. That's the thing people always get wrong. They expect systems to fail loudly, dramatically, all at once. Alarms blaring, screens flashing red, something obvious enough that even the least technical person in the room can point and say, there. That's the problem. Real failures don't work like that. Real failures are quiet. They slip in through the cracks. I wasn't there that night. For the first time in 8 years, 11:45 p.m. came and went without me badge swiping into the building. No coffee, no monitors lighting up, no silent conversation with the system. I was at home, sitting on my couch, doing absolutely nothing. It felt wrong. My body kept expecting something, the routine, the tension, the constant low-level awareness that something, somewhere, was about to go sideways. But there was nothing, just the hum of my refrigerator and the faint glow of a TV I wasn't even watching. I checked the time. 12:07 a.m. right on cue, Chicago drift. I could picture it perfectly, the numbers starting to separate just enough to matter, not enough to trigger an alert, not enough for anyone watching dashboards to notice, but enough. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Normally, I'd already be halfway through correcting it. Tonight, nothing. Back at the office, the system did exactly what it always did. 12:07 a.m. Chicago inventory mismatch, plus 52 units. No alert triggered. Because plus 52 wasn't outside the acceptable threshold, the system allowed it. That was the first crack. 12:19 a.m. Dallas latency spike. Normally, I'd reroute the data stream before the timeout window hit. Tonight, no one touched it. The delay pushed a batch process just slightly off schedule. Not a failure, just late. 12:31 a.m. Atlanta billing mismatch. A few transactions flagged for review. Normally, I'd override the validation, correct the offset, and move on. Tonight, the system logged it, flagged, queued for manual review. Monday problem. One by one, the little things piled up. Not errors, not yet, just inconsistencies. At 1:45 a.m., the automated monitoring system did exactly what it was designed to do. Nothing, because nothing had technically failed, every process completed. Every job returned a status of success. The dashboard stayed green, the graphs stayed smooth. If anyone had checked, they would have seen the same thing they always saw, a stable system. At 3:10 a.m., something slightly more interesting happened. The Midwest logistics system attempted its nightly sync with the central database. Normally, this was where things got messy. Different formats, mismatched timestamps, inconsistent entries, stuff that needed a human touch to reconcile. Without me, the system followed its default rule. If mismatch detected, skip entry, so it skipped and skipped and skipped. By the end of the process, 3% of the data hadn't synced, not enough to break anything, just enough to matter later. By 5:30 a.m. the system settled. Same as always, quiet, clean, green across the board. If you walked into the operations room that morning, you wouldn't have seen anything wrong. That was the beauty of it. I slept through most of it, didn't check my phone, didn't log in, didn't peek at anything, because I already knew Monday morning. That's when the first questions started, not alarms, questions. It began with a report, inventory discrepancies between Chicago and Denver. Nothing massive, just a few dozen units off in multiple categories. Procurement flagged it. Probably a sync delay, someone said. System glitch, someone else added. They adjusted the numbers manually. Problem solved, or so they thought. Then came Dallas. Orders that had processed overnight showed slight timing mismatches. Nothing that stopped them from going through, but enough to cause confusion in scheduling. Maybe the system lagged, a manager suggested. Yeah, we've seen that before, another replied. They moved things around, adjusted timelines, kept going. Atlanta was next. Billing flagged a handful of transactions for review. Normally, these would have been cleared overnight. Now they were sitting there, waiting. A junior analyst looked at them, frowned, and escalated. Should we fix these? She asked. Leave them, her supervisor said. We'll review later. Later. By noon, the system still looked fine. Dashboards green, reports mostly clean, nothing catastrophic, nothing that screamed failure. Just a growing list of small, unresolved issues. At 2:00 p.m., Daniel Cross sat in his office reviewing the weekly performance summary. Everything looked good. Uptime 99.9%. Error rate negligible. Processing speed within expected range. He leaned back in his chair, satisfied. See, he said to the kid with the dashboards. System runs just fine. The kid nodded, scrolling through his charts. Actually, he said, it's performing better without manual intervention. Less noise in the logs. Of course there was less noise. No one was fixing anything. By the end of the day, the issues had multiplied, still small, still manageable, still easy to dismiss, but they were no longer isolated. They were starting to overlap. Chicago's inventory mismatch began affecting Denver's distribution planning. Dallas delays started conflicting with Midwest logistics data. Atlanta's flagged transactions began piling up, creating a backlog no one had time to clear. Each problem fed into the next, not enough to break the system, but enough to bend it. I was sitting on my porch when my phone buzzed. Unknown number, I let it ring, then another and another. I smiled slightly, taking a slow sip of coffee. It had begun. By Tuesday morning, the system wasn't failing, but it wasn't right anymore. And deep down, even if they couldn't articulate it yet, they were starting to feel it. Because the night shift hadn't been quiet, it had been controlled, and now there was no one controlling it. By Tuesday afternoon, the system had crossed an invisible line. Not broken, not crashing, just wrong in ways that were starting to cost money. It began with a shipment, Chicago to Denver, routine transfer, happens dozens of times a week. Except this time, Chicago's inventory said they had 1,248 units. Denver's system said they were expecting 1,196, 52 units. The same 52 that drifted Saturday night. Normally, I would have reconciled that before sunrise. Adjusted the count, aligned both systems, made it disappear like it never happened. But now, it made it all the way through. So Denver received the shipment, scanned everything in, and immediately flagged an overage. Procurement got involved. Accounting got CC'd. 3 different managers started emailing each other in increasingly polite but clearly irritated tones. Can someone confirm correct inventory levels? System shows discrepancy. Please advise. No one could, because the system wasn't wrong in one place. It was wrong in 2 places in 2 different ways. At the same time, Dallas was slipping. Those minor delays from Saturday night had stacked into something uglier. Orders were still processing, but not in the right sequence anymore. Priority shipments were going out late. Low-priority ones were jumping ahead. Nothing catastrophic, just enough to annoy customers, and annoyed customers talk. By Wednesday morning, the first real crack in the armor showed up where it always does: money. Atlanta's billing system had been quietly stacking flagged transactions since Saturday. At first, it was a handful, then a few dozen. By Wednesday morning, it was over 600. Transactions that didn't quite match, totals that didn't align. Calculations that were technically valid but contextually wrong. A junior analyst named Priya was staring at her screen, scrolling through the list, her brow tightening with each entry. "Hey," she called over to her supervisor. "These don't look right." He walked over, glanced at the screen, and frowned. "Why weren't these cleared overnight?" he asked. Priya shrugged. "They've just been sitting. That wasn't supposed to happen." By 10 a.m. a meeting was called. Daniel was there. The dashboard kid was there. A handful of managers dialed in from different regions. On paper, everything still looked fine, but the room didn't feel fine. "Let's walk through the issues," Daniel said, trying to keep his tone calm. Chicago spoke first, inventory mismatch. Denver followed, receiving discrepancies. Dallas chimed in, scheduling inconsistencies. Atlanta finished, billing backlog. Each one on its own was manageable. Together, they formed a pattern no one in that room fully understood. "Is this related?" someone asked. The kid with the dashboards shook his head immediately. "No, these are isolated incidents. The system metrics don't show any systemic failure." Of course they didn't. Metrics don't catch what they don't measure. Daniel leaned forward, rubbing his temples. "Okay," he said, "so we fix them." Individually, that was his second mistake. They assigned people. Chicago would manually adjust inventory. Dallas would reschedule shipments. Atlanta would start clearing flagged transactions. Piece by piece, they tried to force the system back into shape, but the system wasn't made of pieces. It was a web. By Wednesday afternoon, things started breaking in ways they couldn't ignore anymore. Chicago corrected their inventory numbers, but Denver had already processed shipments based on the old data, so now Denver was wrong. Dallas rescheduled delayed orders. But those orders were tied to inventory that Chicago had just fixed, so now Dallas was shipping items that technically didn't exist. Atlanta started clearing transactions. But those transactions were based on mismatched data from Dallas and Chicago, so the billing system began producing totals that didn't align with either. Fix one thing, break two more. At 2:30 p.m., someone said the word out loud. "This feels connected." Silence followed, because admitting that meant admitting something bigger was wrong, something structural, something they didn't understand. Daniel turned to the kid. "Run a full system diagnostic," he said. The kid nodded confidently, fingers flying across his keyboard. Minutes later, he turned the screen around. "All systems operational," he said. "No critical errors, of course." Because the system wasn't failing, it was drifting. By late afternoon, frustration started turning into blame. Chicago blamed Denver for bad receiving. Denver blamed Chicago for bad counts. Dallas blamed both. Atlanta blamed everyone. Emails got sharper. Meetings got louder. And underneath it all, the same question kept circling, unspoken but heavy. Why didn't this happen before? At 5:15 p.m., Daniel finally asked it. What changed? No one answered, because the answer was obvious, and no one wanted to say it. That's when the kid spoke up. "Well, technically, the only variable we removed was overnight manual intervention." There it was, said out loud. Daniel leaned back slowly. "You're saying this is because we automated the night shift?" The kid hesitated. "Not exactly," he said. "I'm saying the system is behaving as designed. It's just exposing inconsistencies that were previously being corrected manually. A nice way of saying hidden, handled, fixed before anyone noticed." Daniel stood up, pacing slightly. "So what do we do?" he asked. The room stayed quiet because no one had an answer. That night, Wednesday night, the system ran again. No Marcus, no intervention, no corrections. And for the first time, the cracks didn't just spread. They started connecting. By Thursday morning, the system wasn't just drifting. It was pulling itself apart. And somewhere deep in the logs no one was reading, the real problem was already screaming. I was at home when my phone buzzed again. Same unknown number, same persistence. I let it ring. Then I muted it because I already knew what they were about to realize. They hadn't removed a cost, they had removed control. And now, the system was finally telling the truth. Thursday morning didn't feel like a normal workday. It felt like something was about to snap. By 8:30 am, the cracks from earlier in the week had turned into fractures you couldn't ignore anymore. Chicago's adjusted inventory numbers no longer matched anything, past records, current shipments, or future projections. Every correction they made seemed to echo backward and forward at the same time, breaking something else. Denver had stopped trusting incoming shipments entirely. Pallets were sitting on docks unprocessed because no one could confirm what was actually supposed to be there. Dallas scheduling was a mess. Trucks were either leaving half-empty or overloaded, and no one could explain why. Dispatchers were manually overriding routes just to keep things moving. And Atlanta was bleeding. By 9:15 a.m., the billing backlog had crossed a threshold no one could pretend was minor anymore. Thousands of transactions, some duplicated, some missing, some calculated on data that no longer existed in any consistent form. Priya was still at her desk, eyes locked on the screen, scrolling through line after line of numbers that refused to make sense. "These totals don't match anything," she said quietly. Her supervisor didn't respond right away, because he knew. At 10 o'clock a.m., the emergency meeting wasn't labeled emergency, but everyone knew it was. Daniel stood at the front of the conference room, no smile this time. The dashboard kid sat beside him, quieter than before, his laptop open but his confidence noticeably dimmer. "We need clarity," Daniel said, voice tight. "What exactly are we dealing with?" Chicago spoke first again, but this time there was no confidence. "We can't reconcile inventory," their manager admitted. "Every adjustment creates new discrepancies. We don't know which numbers are real anymore." Denver followed. "We've halted inbound processing on certain shipments. We're holding inventory because we can't verify it." Dallas didn't even try to soften it. "We're guessing," their lead said bluntly. "We're making decisions without reliable data." Then Atlanta. Priya didn't speak. Her supervisor did. "We have transactions we can't validate," he said. "If we push them through, we risk billing errors. If we don't, revenue gets delayed." Silence filled the room, heavy, thick, real. Daniel turned slowly to the kid. "Your system," he said. "Why isn't it catching this?" The kid swallowed. "It is," he said. "Technically, these aren't system failures, they're data inconsistencies. The system is processing exactly what it's given." Daniel's jaw tightened. "So it's doing nothing to fix it?" "That's not what it was designed to do," the kid replied. "Of course it wasn't." That's when someone finally said it. "Who used to handle this?" The question hung in the air for a second. Everyone knew the answer. No one wanted to say it. "Marcus," someone muttered. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, staring at the table, like he was trying to replay the last week in his head and find the exact moment things went wrong. He wouldn't find it because it wasn't a moment, it was a removal. By noon, the financial impact started showing up in places executives couldn't ignore. Delayed billing meant delayed revenue recognition. Accounting started flagging discrepancies in daily reports. Projected cash flow dipped, not massively, not yet, but enough to make someone upstairs notice. At 12:45 p.m., Daniel got the call. He stepped out of the room to take it. When he came back, his face had changed. "What happened?" someone asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, "The CFO wants an explanation." That was the moment the situation officially stopped being operational and became political. By 1:30 p.m. the tone shifted. No more calm discussions, no more "let's monitor this." Now it was "fix it." They threw people at the problem, extra analysts, managers. Even a couple of IT engineers who hadn't touched the system in years. They started digging. Logs, reports, data trails, trying to trace the inconsistencies back to a source. But the source wasn't in the data. It was in the absence of something they couldn't see. At 2:10 p.m., someone tried to stabilize the system. A senior IT engineer, confident, experienced, and completely out of context, decided the issue was batch misalignment. His solution: restart the overnight reconciliation jobs manually, all of them, at once. For about 5 minutes it looked like it worked. Processes kicked off. Logs started filling. Data began moving. Then the collision started. Jobs that were never meant to run simultaneously began overriding each other. Inventory updates conflicted with billing recalculations. Logistics sync processes pulled partial date amid update. Validation checks fired in the middle of incomplete transactions. The system didn't crash, it choked. By 2:27 p.m., the first real error message appeared. Not a warning, not a flag, an error. Data integrity violation detected. Then another and another. Screens that had been green all week started flickering. Yellow, then orange. People started talking over each other. "What did you just run? Why are these processes overlapping? Who approved this?" The engineer stared at his screen, confused. "It should have worked," he said. "It should have, in a system that made sense." By 3 p.m. they had done it. They hadn't just let the system drift, they had pushed it, hard. And now it was breaking. That's when Daniel made the call. Back at my house, I was sitting at the kitchen table, halfway through a sandwich when my phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. I stared at it for a moment, then took a bite, let it ring. It stopped, started again, persistent. I wiped my hands, picked up the phone, and flipped it over. Let it go to voicemail, because now they were ready, not to manage it, not to optimize it. To admit they had no idea what they were doing. I finished my sandwich in silence. Phone buzzing again in the background, and for the first time all week I smiled, because the system hadn't failed, it had just stopped being protected. By Thursday afternoon, the company stopped pretending. The language changed, no more inconsistencies, no more minor disruptions, no more optimization phase. Now it was simple, problem. At 3:30 p.m., the conference room wasn't big enough anymore. More people had been pulled in: finance, legal, senior IT, operations heads from multiple regions. Voices overlapped, laptops were open, phones buzzing nonstop. The calm, controlled tone from earlier in the week was gone. This was noise, raw, unfiltered noise. Daniel stood at the center of it, trying to regain control. Everyone stopped for a second, he said, louder than before. It worked barely. What is the current status? He asked. No one answered immediately, because the truth wasn't clean anymore. Finally, someone from IT spoke. We've got multiple overlapping processes corrupting transaction states, he said. Data isn't consistent across systems. Fixing one side breaks the other. Finance chimed in next. We can't finalize revenue numbers, a woman said, her voice tight. There are too many discrepancies. We don't know what's billable and what isn't. Logistics followed. Shipments are being delayed or rerouted manually. Drivers are waiting for confirmations that aren't coming. Then Atlanta again. Priya didn't even look up this time. We stopped clearing transactions, her supervisor said. It's too risky. We could be billing wrong amounts. Daniel exhaled slowly. So everything is stuck. No one argued. The kid with the dashboards tried one last time. If we isolate the systems, no, Daniel snapped, cutting him off, not loud. But the kid went quiet because this wasn't a system problem anymore. This was a company problem. At 4:10 p.m., Daniel's phone rang. He stepped out again. This time when he came back, he didn't sit down. The CEO is involved, he said. That changed the room instantly. Effective immediately, he continued. This is a top priority incident. All hands, we fix this now. Now, like it hadn't been building all week. Who knows this system best? Someone asked. The question landed heavier this time, because now it mattered. Silence, then quietly, Marcus. Daniel closed his eyes for a second, then opened them. Get me his number. Back at my place, the sun was starting to dip. The light through the window had that late afternoon glow, soft, calm, completely disconnected from the chaos unfolding across town. My phone had been buzzing on and off for the past hour. Calls, texts, voicemails, all from numbers I didn't recognize, or numbers I did but didn't feel like answering. I finally picked it up, scrolled, listened to one voicemail, Daniel's voice. Tighter than I'd ever heard it. Marcus, we need to talk. Call me back as soon as you get this. Need, not would like, not when you have time. Need. I put the phone back down, didn't call, because I knew how this worked. First call is polite, second call is urgent, third call, that's when the tone changes. At 5:02 p.m. the third call came. Same number, I let it ring twice, 3 times, then I answered. Yeah, I said, no greeting, no name. There was a pause on the other end, then, Marcus, it's Daniel. I didn't respond, let him sit in it. We're having some issues, he said carefully. Some issues, I almost laughed. Systems acting weird, I replied. Try turning it off and on. Silence. He knew what I was doing, and he didn't have the luxury of getting annoyed. This is serious, he said. We've got cross-system discrepancies, transaction conflicts, logistics delays. Sounds like Thursday, I said. Another pause, longer this time. Marcus, he said finally, dropping the corporate tone, we need your help. There it was. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. How's the automation going? I asked. No answer. The dashboards, I added, still green. He exhaled sharply. Can you come in? He asked, not command, not request, closer to asking for a favor. I let the silence stretch, not to be dramatic, just to let it sink in. When did this start? I asked. You know when? He said. Yeah, I did. What exactly do you want me to do? I asked. Fix it, he said. Simple, desperate, honest. I smiled slightly. There it was. I don't work there anymore, I said. I know, so why would I fix it? Another pause, this one heavier. Because it's your system, he said. I shook my head. No, I replied, it was my system. Silence again, then quietly, what will it take? There it was, the shift. From authority to negotiation. I didn't answer right away, walked over to the window, watched the sky darken, because this was important, not the money, not the title, the understanding. You removed the only thing holding it together, I said finally. You didn't replace it, you just took it out. I get that, he said quickly. No, I replied, you don't. I turned back toward the room. You thought nothing was happening at night, I continued. So you assumed nothing needed to. On the other end I could hear movement, voices in the background, pressure building. We made a mistake, Daniel said, simple, direct, late. I nodded even though he couldn't see it. Yeah, I said, you did. Another pause, then, will you come in? I looked at the phone, thought about it. Then I said, I'll think about it, and hung up. Across town in that glass-walled conference room, I imagined the silence that followed, the looks, the realization, because now they knew 2 things. 1, they couldn't fix it. And 2, I didn't have to help. I set the phone down on the table. It buzzed again almost immediately, didn't pick it up, because for the first time in 8 years, the night was coming, and they had no one to face it. Thursday night came in heavy, not quiet like before, not subtle. There was a weight to it now, pressing down on everything, systems, people, decisions. The kind of pressure that builds when too many things have gone wrong and no one knows how to stop it. At 11:58 p.m., the operations floor wasn't empty. It was full. Too full. People who had never stayed past 6 p.m. were now sitting in front of screens they didn't understand, watching logs they couldn't read, waiting for something they couldn't predict. Daniel was there, the dashboard kid was there, 3 IT engineers, 2 finance leads. A logistics manager dialed in on a giant screen, and in the middle of it all the system, still running, still humming, still pretending everything was fine. Okay, Daniel said, trying to sound steady. We monitor, we react, no unnecessary changes. No unnecessary changes. That was the closest they'd come all week to the right idea. 12:07 a.m. Chicago drift. It showed up exactly on schedule, plus 61 units this time, bigger than before. Should we adjust it? Someone asked. Daniel hesitated. Not yet, he said. Let's see how it propagates. Wrong call. Because the system didn't wait. 12:18 a.m. Dallas latency spike, longer this time. The delay pushed multiple dependent processes out of sync. Logs started stacking. Why is this taking so long? One of the engineers asked. No one answered. 12:29 a.m. Atlanta mismatch, except now it wasn't a handful of transactions. It was hundreds, flagged instantly, queued, stacking on top of the backlog that never got cleared. Clear them, Priya's voice came through the speaker. No, Daniel said quickly. We don't touch billing until we understand the data. Too late for that. By 1 a.m. the system had moved past drift. It was colliding. Chicago's inflated inventory fed into Denver's inbound expectations. Denver rejected shipments. Dallas rerouted deliveries based on rejected inventory. Atlanta tried to bill for shipments that technically hadn't arrived. Each system trusted its own data. None of them agreed. Why are these numbers different? Someone asked. Because they always were. I just never let you see it. At 1:22 a.m. the first real break happened. Not an error message, a decision. An engineer, same one from earlier, leaned forward. We need to stabilize this, he said. We can't just watch it fall apart. He started typing. Wait, Daniel said. What are you doing? Isolating Chicago from the sync loop, the engineer replied. If we stop the source of the drift, he hit enter. For a moment everything paused, then the system reacted. Chicago's data stopped flowing. But Denver didn't know that, so it kept processing based on outdated values. Dallas rerouted shipments again. Atlanta recalculated billing based on partial data. Instead of one bad stream, they now had multiple broken ones. What did you just do? Someone snapped. I isolated the issue, the engineer said defensively. No, Daniel said, voice low, you split it. By 2 a.m. the system wasn't just unstable, it was fractured. Different regions operating on different versions of reality. Different numbers, different timelines, different truths, and no one knew which one was right. Back at my place I was awake, not working, just awake. Sitting in the dark, phone on the table, screen lighting up every few minutes. Calls, texts, voicemails, I didn't need to check, I could feel it. The system was in free fall. At 2:17 a.m. my phone rang again. Daniel. I let it ring twice, 3 times, then I answered. Yeah, I said. Marcus, he said, no hesitation this time, no corporate tone left. It's getting worse. I said nothing. We tried to contain it, he continued. It's not working. Systems are out of sync across regions. Billing is frozen. Logistics is guessing. I could hear voices behind him, stress, movement, panic. How bad? I asked. A pause, then, we don't know what's real anymore. There it was, the line. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a second. Yeah, I said, that happens. Marcus, listen, Daniel said quickly. We need you here, now. I didn't answer right away, because now it mattered. What changed? I asked. What do you mean? You said the system runs itself, I replied. You said nothing happens at night. Silence. We were wrong, he said. I nodded slowly. Say it again. Another pause, longer, harder. We were wrong, he repeated. Good. And I pushed, and we need you. Closer. And, I said again. He exhaled sharply. We can't fix it without you. There it was, complete. I opened my eyes, looked at the phone. Okay, I said. Relief hit his voice instantly. Okay, great. Can you? I'm not done, I cut in. Silence again, but different this time. Listening. You didn't remove a role, I said. You removed control, and now you want it back. Yes, he said immediately. That's not free, I replied. I understand, he said. We'll compensate you. I shook my head. It's not just money. Another pause. What do you want? He asked. I looked out the window. Dark sky, city lights in the distance. I want conditions, I said. Name them, and just like that, the balance shifted. They weren't calling an employee anymore. They were negotiating with the only person who could stop the collapse, and this time I was the one in control. The line stayed quiet after I said it. I want conditions. No pushback, no negotiation tactics, no corporate language trying to soften the moment, just silence, because they knew. What are they? Daniel asked finally. His voice had changed, not just tired, now controlled, careful. He understood what this was. I didn't rush it. This wasn't about being dramatic. This was about being clear. First, I said, I don't come back as an employee. A pause. Okay, he said, I come back as a consultant, my terms, my authority. Done. Too fast. Good. Second, I continued, I don't answer to operations. Silence on the other end shifted. Someone else was probably listening now. I report directly to whoever actually owns the consequences. A beat, CIO, Daniel said, or higher if needed. Third, I said, no one touches the system while I'm working. That won't be a problem. It already is, I replied. That's why you're calling me. He didn't argue. Fourth, I said, I get full access restored, everything, no delays, no approvals. Done. I paused. There was one more, the one that mattered. And last, I said, when this is over, you don't pretend this didn't happen. Silence, heavy. I want it documented, I continued. What went wrong, why it went wrong. And what it actually takes to keep this system running. That's internal, Daniel said carefully. No, I replied, that's reality. Another long pause, then, okay, I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. Send it in writing, I said. I leave when I see it. We'll have it in 10 minutes. Good, I said and hung up. The contract came in 8. I didn't read every word. I didn't need to. I knew what mattered. Authority, access, control. I grabbed my keys, didn't rush. Didn't run, just moved. The drive back felt different. Same roads, same turns, but everything felt sharper, clearer, because I wasn't going back to fix a system. I was going back to take it back. The parking lot was still full when I pulled in. Lights on across the building, people still inside, waiting. Lewis was at the door. He looked at me, then broke into a grin. Knew they'd call you, he said. Yeah, I replied. Took them long enough. He opened the door without another word. The operations floor was chaos, not loud chaos, focused chaos. People moving fast, talking low, watching screens like they might explode. When I walked in, heads turned, not all at once, but enough. No one said anything. They didn't need to. I walked straight past them, into the room, my room. The monitors were still on, logs still scrolling, system still alive, barely. I set my bag down, pulled the chair in, sat. For a second I just watched. The patterns were still there. Broken, misaligned, but familiar. Okay, I muttered, let's see what you've done. Behind me I could feel them gathering. Daniel. The engineers, probably half the room, watching, waiting. Everyone out, I said without turning around. Silence. I'm serious, I added. If you're not me, you're in the way. A hesitation. Then movement, chair scraping, footsteps retreating. Door closing. Good, now it was quiet. The way it was supposed to be. I cracked my knuckles, opened a terminal. First step, stop the bleeding. I killed the overlapping processes. One by one, carefully, not fast, precise. The system resisted. Of course it did. It always does when it's been pushed too far. But eventually the noise dropped. Second step, find the truth. I pulled raw logs, not summaries, not dashboards. Raw, messy, real. There it was, every inconsistency. Every misalignment, every place where the system had tried to correct itself and failed. Yeah, I whispered. I see you. Third step, rebuild alignment. Chicago first. Always Chicago. Fix the source. Stabilize the numbers. Force sync. Denver next, adjust receiving. Reconcile against corrected data. Dallas, reroute, resequence, bring timing back in line. Atlanta last, always last, because billing doesn't guess, billing waits, line by line, process by process. Hours passed. I didn't notice, didn't need to. At some point Daniel knocked, didn't come in, just waited. How's it looking? He asked quietly. Alive, I said, not fixed, not yet, but alive. By 3:40 a.m. the system started to feel familiar again. Not perfect, but stable. That hum, it was back. I leaned back for a second, closed my eyes, listened. There it was. Then I leaned forward again. Final step, push the correction. I ran the reconciliation. Full system, all regions, all data. The screen filled with output, lines scrolling, fast, clean. I watched every line, waiting. Then no errors, just green. I exhaled slowly. Done. I stood up, opened the door. They were all there, of course they were. Daniel stepped forward. Well, he asked. I looked at him, then at the room. It's fixed, I said, not dramatic, not loud, just fact. Relief hit the room like a wave. People exhaled, shoulders dropped. Phones came out, messages sent, but I didn't move, because this mattered too. You didn't break the system, I said, looking at Daniel. You just removed the only thing holding it together. He nodded, didn't argue, didn't defend. Won't happen again, he said. I shrugged. We'll see. I walked past him, back toward the exit. Marcus, he called. I stopped, didn't turn. Thank you, he said. I thought about that for a second. Then I shook my head. You're welcome, I said. Don't forget why, and I walked out. The night air was cool, quiet. The system was running. The company was breathing again. And me, I finally understood something. It wasn't about being needed. It was about being understood, and now they did.